Our stream is going. I think. There we are. Hello. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talking About Survivor. I am Christiana Ellis.
And I'm Mike Mateen.
And tonight we are talking about Survivor Winners at War, episode 12. And we have once again a powerful performance from Tony, who is doing so well, except for the fact that it's really obvious now that he is in trouble as soon as he doesn't win immunity. But yeah, considering that's all we talked about last time, it's kind of we got another episode full of him doing all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, and so I mean, I guess of the highlights or the best point, like it was hard to choose a favorite point in this one. There wasn't really anything that like stood out. I mean, the spy nest was kind of funny, but ultimately anticlimactic. The carrying of the coconuts. Yeah, I mean, it's another cool like exile thing, but not. It just didn't. I mean, it wasn't that standoutish.
Mm-hmm.
So I was thinking about that, and I was thinking. It's weird to call it my favorite moment, but it's the one that stood out the most to me was the fact that Nick let Tony buy immunity from him, basically, for one fire token.
Mm-hmm.
That was, I thought, insane, considering everything we had talked about last time, and then what we saw Tony do once again, once he was immune again, it just seemed like an absurd decision.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, he explains in his confessional, or at least he claims after the fact, that he was gonna fall anyway, and he was just like, I can't do this much longer. I'm gonna just try to get what I can from it. But at the same time, like how much of that is, is trying to justify to yourself the decision you want to make, which is to eat peanut butter.
Right.
But you're absolutely right that like I think everyone who stepped down, I mean they talked about it in the tribal council of like it felt like a bad decision just right away, like not not even just like, oh, we thought about it later and regretted it. It was more like, oh no, God, what did we do?
Yeah, I mean, what the girls didn't realize is that they essentially just handed immunity to Denise like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was Denise, right?
Yeah. I mean, the thing is though that like they really have no excuse for not realizing that. I think maybe it was part of what happened there is that both Kim and Michelle kind of
they didn't realize each other was going to do it. I think.
Yeah, like they both kind of did it, but sort of didn't process that if both of them do it, then Denise wins. They kind of each of them thought that they were okay to go, but yeah.
Yeah. So I mean that was kind of like I think the standout moment, which is that end of that immunity challenge was so bizarre, and kind of set up everything else that happened.
Yeah. I think my favorite moment is the awkwardness after Ben finds the idol and tries to hide it and is busted by Tony, and just the following conversation. Especially leading to the finishing of that scene where in such a weird, awkward, celebratory moment, Ben scoops up Tony like a groom carrying a bride and runs down the path with him to Tony's terror, saying, "What are you doing? You're gonna hurt your back. You're gonna trip and fall on something." And it's like he's like, "Stop! Don't do this." It was just like, what is happening right now? It was so weird. And it was so obviously sort of a like, oh no, I did perhaps a justifiable thing, but then got caught, and now it's awkward, and so I gotta pretend like, no, that's not awkward. We're good. We're fine. Nothing's awkward. We're still buddies. See, watch, buddies do this things like this, right? And Tony's going, "What are you doing, man? Whoa!"
Yeah, I can vouch for buddies don't do that. Even when we weren't socially distanced from each other, we didn't pick each other up and run down paths.
I will give credit that there could be a buddy relationship where that could be a regular feature. However, certainly not something pre-established within the Ben and Tony relationship.
Right. Yeah, and not a standard mode of celebrating with your friend.
Yeah, it was weird.
No, that's a good one. Yeah, I didn't even think about that. I like that.
Yeah. Although, frankly, honestly, I hadn't in my head thought of Ben as being that strong.
Yeah,
I mean, because Tony's not tiny, right? You know, like he's not a little guy. But Ben just scooped him up and was like running down the path with him, and I was just thinking, that's not a small amount of strength required for that.
No, you're right. I mean, he was incredible. Like how much bigger than Tony he is, and stronger. Like because like you said, Tony's not tall, but Tony's pretty thick for for his height, and I mean for anybody. But yeah, he's dense and heavy. And Ben just kind of
yeah. But I think the best is not even just carrying him. It's literally Tony saying, "Whoa, stop! You're gonna hurt yourself. You're gonna trip on something." And Ben just running away from the camera down the path, carrying Tony. That was my favorite.
I like it.
But yeah, my biggest surprise was going to be kind of what you mentioned, which is how many people stepped down for food, given that this is a winner's season late in the game when there has been a lot of chaos, and it's not like there's a solid alliance with the numbers that has just been dominating. Everybody has been chaotic all along, and it just surprised me, like, Kim, Michelle, and Nick all stepping down. I mean,
yeah, right. Like I said, it was just kind of like, I mean, it was sort of, I mean, it was, I would say, like the climactic point of the episode, because it is the turning point for everything that happened. By Tony winning in that fashion, gave him even more confidence to like go and maneuver votes and things like that. I mean, it just I couldn't believe that it happened. I had, for my biggest surprise though, was that they were transferring and offering all of these idols and advantages and like all this stuff, and not one got used. Like everybody, but I was surprised that everybody felt that confident after everything, that none of the stuff, like Tony's offering to play his idol for Sarah, like I forget who had the 50-50 coin. I think Jeremy had it.
Yeah, Jeremy had it at the end, but I think it was like, I think the expectation is he's supposed to return it to Michelle since he didn't use it.
Right. But still, the fact that like all of those things were there and everybody still felt confident enough to just stay the course, that surprised me. I mean, I get it. I mean, they obviously it worked. I mean, for what they were trying to do, they got Kim.
Yeah.
But it was still, I felt like that was surprising.
Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and say, especially since last week it didn't happen, and this week it did again, I'm going to go ahead and come down on the side of, I'm tired of the tribal councils where everybody's getting up and whispering. It is no longer fun or interesting to watch.
Nope.
It's just chaos, and it makes us feel like what's happening. It makes it feel like, did anything we watched before mean anything? We're just watching a lot of whispering where we can't hear what they say. And it ends up spending a lot of screen time on that could have been spent on something that we can actually get something out of. I'm tired of it. It was really interesting when it started to happen, but it's old now, and I don't know if how do you pull it back? Like you
got to make a rule next. I mean, you have to.
Well, but like, how do you even codify that rule? Like, people can't talk to each other; they can only talk to Jeff. Like, that seems perhaps overly strict.
I mean, I feel like it would have to be something like, and again, there's going to have to be some sort of, judgment on this. But I could see them putting a rule in where you can't say anything at tribal council that isn't available to everyone to hear.
Yeah, maybe, but like even still, like how far do you take that? Does that take, what does that mean for like two contestants that are seated not next to each other, mouthing stuff to each other while they stay seated and making eye contact? Like,
That's why I said there's going to have to be some judgment, and it's
mhm.
going to be like a teacher and note passing, basically. And Jeff's going to have to say, "Oh, Tony, I see. It looks like you're trying to say something to Ben. Remember, the rule is that you've got to say that so that everybody knows what you're talking about."
Yeah.
And then he can't say what he actually meant. Like he won't say what he actually meant to say to Ben, but
Hmm.
he would have to say something in that that would be out loud. I could see that. I mean, it's
Hmm.
not perfect, but you just have to leave the fact that Probst is a pretty good judge of these things, and it be something like because again, that's
Yeah.
very clear. Is like if everybody has to hear it, like anybody could also then voice an objection and say, "Hey Jeff, I think these guys are talking back here. Aren't we all supposed to hear what they're saying?" And it would sort of like self-regulate after a couple of times,
Hmm.
in where people they'd still try it, but it would be so reduced that it wouldn't be this.
Yeah. And I feel like it also gradually is wearing away at the sense that Probst is in control of what's going on. Because, like,
Right.
this time he even switched into kind of like the jokey sports commentator voice as to indicate that he is no longer a participant in this. It's just happening without him. Which I don't know. Like that doesn't feel right. Now, I mean, the game can certainly grow and evolve, and it's been an interesting trend, but I feel like it's gone too far, where it just is frustrating now.
Right, and that's what I said. I think whatever 2 weeks ago or three, whenever Sophie got voted, or not when she got voted
Well,
out, the one before she got voted
yeah,
out. I was hoping that her calling attention to like how ridiculous this was would kind of help squash it, and it
right.
worked for like a week, and then it's back to where it was, and it's just
Hmm.
I agree with you. I don't like it. We're both just sitting here. We're not even arguing with each other. We're both just like now venting to each other about how much we both dislike it.
Yeah. Well, I think to some extent it's worse when it's a situation where people's votes are still somewhat up in the air and it's not just a thing where everyone's decision is made and they're done and they're not talking, because then people shut down those conversations. That's what happened last week. But and maybe this season has been especially bad in that regard because they're all good players and they're all, it is more chaotic week to week. But at the same
And people are
time,
picking up on cues in Tribal Council better than other seasons because they've all been they're all so adept at that.
mhm,
So they catch when it's like, oh shit, this isn't going exactly how I thought, and so to your point, because they're all winners, and so they're more inclined to try to seek reassurance or change or whatever. Yeah.
mhm, mhm.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I interrupted you.
No, that's all right. I mean, I think we've both said what we wanted to say about that. Um, you mentioned Spy Nest, which was certainly a highlight, even though, again, it was one where basically nothing came of it. He hid in a tree for a while, and the only one that came by that we saw at least was Sarah, who knew he was there. It's like so. We could also have Tony got pooped on during a conversation with Ben. Um, I think if we're going to talk about some Tony highlights in general, just the fact that the degree to which he was able to damage control with Sarah and Ben after last time. Like, even though Ben continued to be frustrated about ending up being pressured to vote for a different person than he felt like he wanted to see go, he still did,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, now, obviously, Tony being immune meant that none of that could just turn on to him, right? Like, that's the thing, is that it's one thing to say Tony successfully got people to vote the way he wanted, but how many of those people would have voted for Tony if he wasn't immune?
Right, and it was almost, and it also started that Ben's bigger beef is still with Jeremy.
Mm-hmm.
So even as frustrated as he was with Tony, he still wanted Jeremy, which is what we talked about last time as to why you felt like you could expend that one vote, because Jeremy was going to be a target again, you know, and he was. But that's what, again, we're sort of the madness / genius of Tony. We'll see how it turns out. I mean, the fact that, like, Jeremy, because he was still available, everybody just started moving towards him. So it made sense what they did last time, because the big target was still here. Ben, everybody was able to forgive Tony and move towards it. And I feel like, again, we obviously don't know, but I feel like if Tony had been not immune, Jeremy would have been the target, but Jeremy would have actually gone because Tony wouldn't have whipped up everything knowing he was immune. I think they still wanted Jeremy more than Tony. That was the feeling, the sense that I got.
Yeah, could be.
But to your point, because he did this again and changed the vote and whipped all the votes, now he's got himself in a predicament, you know, because he's done it more than once, you know.
Right. Although, I mean, making Kim the target this time was specifically because she was the one pressing that Tony should be the target before he was immune again, and taking her out, even though he was immune this time and she couldn't have done it anyway.
That's fair. That's why, I guess, that's kind of why I called it like the to be determined madness or genius.
Well, you know, honestly, it is a high risk, high reward strategy, because he is such an obvious target that has been skating by on the virtue of winning 3 individual immunity challenges in a row, which is nothing, you know, that's nothing to sneeze at, right? But the other, you know, the risk, of course, is that, like, as soon as he is vulnerable again, will he be able to keep going? Will he be able to survive that? Well, we'll have to see that. But honestly, I definitely feel like at this point, if he makes it to the final 3, I don't see who else wins over Tony right now.
No, if he can get to the end, he can win this game easily.
I think so. On that note, that just raises the question when I'm just thinking about, like, who else could win. Here's a question for you. Do you think anyone coming back into the game from Edge of Extinction can win? Anyone. Doesn't matter who it is. Like, pick anyone you want from Edge of Extinction. Do you think coming back into the game when they win the challenge or whatever, is there any scenario where someone in that situation gets to win the game?
Yeah, I could see that. I could. It's going to drastically depend on Endgame, though, and who ends up there with them.
Yeah.
Because you get somebody, like, there's, like let's just take a couple of examples. I'm looking here. So Natalie comes back, helps whip up some way to eliminate big threats, you know, and works hard and can come and make the case like, hey, I survived Extinction for X number of days and then came back and eliminated the people most likely to beat me. Like, that could be a winning one.
Yeah. But I mean, the hole you're coming out of is, I got voted out, and it was only the fact that this is a season that has this Edge of Extinction that allows me to even have a shot.
Right, but see, that's what makes this different, though, is that you have, like, think of all the things that they did over there. You know, with the what's it called, the extortion, and, like, they had more influence on the game, which may have been, some of it was fun, some of it was maybe a little out, you know, overstated, like how much they were able to do it, but they were able to still participate. And so you have a case that you can make other than, I just got voted out. You could say, I was voted out first because I was the biggest threat. I outlasted everybody over there and got back here and did all these things while I was there, and then did this when I came back. You know, I'm not saying it's an easy scenario by any means, but it exists. The path exists, and you have somebody like Sophie or Yule, or somebody who goes out, like, kind of later, or Tyson even, and who came back once, and then if he comes back again, he's like, look, they kept getting rid of me because I was so good, and I kept coming back. Like, you know, there's a story there that isn't easy, to your point. It's not likely. I wouldn't put money, if I had to bet on who was going to win this game, like, I wouldn't touch anybody over on Extinction, but there is definitely a path with the right scenario and story.
I guess so. I sort of just feel like on a regular season, maybe, but on an all winner season, I just feel like having been voted out in that season feels like too big a hurdle to me. But you're right, it's possible.
But also remember, everybody over on Extinction are the jury members.
Well, that's
So
another thing
you're
that's awkward about it.
right, but you could be building relationships, and so all of a sudden, like say you're Parvati, and you can tell the story of coming up with the idea for the extortion and doing this and that. These people have now they've spent as much time with you as anybody else, and they're the ones who are actually voting. And if you won them over with your personality, and they'll be more willing to listen to what you did while on Extinction and how you beat them and how you got like you're almost outlasting them as much as you are the people on the other side now. So that's another wrinkle that makes it possible for somebody over there to have a shot.
It's just so weird. There's never been a season where someone was on the jury for the whole final stretch of the game, but then got to come back in. Because any season where someone has been out and then came back, they weren't on the jury for 5 or 6 sessions, right?
Correct.
I mean, that's weird. And I don't know how that's going to play out. I mean, I guess we'll see if someone from, Edge of Extinction makes it to the final 3. I can't help but think that there's no way that, like, there has to be an opportunity for the person coming back to be voted out again before the final.
Yeah, and I guarantee there'll be like multiple ones. Like there'll probably be 2 because they want to have the ability for them to like win or buy some sort of immunity idol that gets them through the first one. But then they're going to make sure they're exposed for at least 1 vote unless they win immunity. And then we'll see. Like I said, but that's the thing. If you come back and you, through what you did, accumulated enough fire tokens that you can buy the first immunity, make it through that, and then you win the next immunity, I mean, you're starting to build a story. And so, again, I'm saying I'm very low odds on this one, but there's a path.
I guess. I mean, it's never smart money to insist that there is no possible way it could ever happen. I mean, because even if it doesn't happen, that doesn't prove my case, right? It just means that it didn't happen, not that it couldn't have.
Yeah. But to your point, the question was for me. Yeah. I think, yes, somebody could win from there. I think it would have to be the right one. Like, I think if somebody like Danny comes back, I mean, I don't see a path for her. She hasn't really done much, didn't really do much when she was there in the first. I mean, not that she's a bad person or a bad player. Like, she just didn't have a lot of influence on this season. And if she just wins that last immunity, that's her only story is like, yeah, I got voted off, I made it, and then I won this 1 immunity, and here I am. It's like, I don't know, that gets you the win. But again, that's part of what makes this interesting is the social dynamics is that they're competing against other people. So the structure of which one of them it is versus who they're there with, like that all changes this,
Yeah. Speaking of Edge of Extinction, I feel like they really got diminishing returns with this second effort challenge. I mean, the first one was kind of such an amazing sequence, not only like in concept, but like the specific way that it played out with Ethan and then everybody kind of finishing it with them, that whole sort of thing. And they kind of tried to build a narrative like that too at this time with Rob finishing anyway, even though he wasn't going to be getting the tokens for it and hurting his elbow and all that, which had to suck, I'm sure. But at the same time, like, it felt like a lesser sequel rather than a new thing.
Exactly, which is why I kind of touched on it when I was building up into what was my best moment or whatever the biggest moment is this. It felt like this could have been it, like with Rob getting hurt and his determination to finish, and Amber just being like, "Yeah, if you know Rob, like this, like that was all nice." But you're right; it felt especially when we realize he's not. It doesn't seem like he's that hurt. Like, and it just, I don't know. In hindsight, it almost felt more like he was just being a stubborn jerk, which wasn't how you were supposed to leave it. I don't know. It was weird. The whole thing just didn't hit right. To your point, you know. And I think part of it's because the first one was so big, it felt like they were trying to grasp at it, and it was like the straight to DVD version of the challenge versus the theatrical.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, just from sort of a pacing of the narrative standpoint, you almost feel like they got that one too early. You know what I mean? They got a high and they weren't able to top it.
Yep.
But you know. So let's see what you got an MVP for this episode?
I mean, I got to give it to Tony again. I mean, the guy, you know, won 2 individual immunities, came here, built the spy nest. I mean, that was funny, but managed to re-put together his relationship with Sarah and mostly with Ben. Then was able to buy his way into another immunity.
Yeah.
Take that, target the person who was talking about thinking maybe he might be next once he's not immune, and get everybody to vote for them. Like, it's hard for him not to be the MVP of this one to me. You know?
Yeah. And even like saying like buy his way into a third, I feel like it's a legit win, right?
I think it's clever how he made sure he got the win by convincing Nick to do that. Like he had some agency in that outside of just like being good at the challenge, you know?
Yeah. But I mean, honestly, I think he would have been a fool to not agree to the terms of like, I'll step down and let you win if you give me one token. Like,
oh, that's right. You're right. Sorry. Yes, I've been just talking about it like Tony proposed it. You're right. No. Nick did propose it.
Yeah.
Which again is why it's so bizarre. Yeah.
Well, so I mean, I guess technically, Tony maybe did mention it idly earlier in the challenge, right? And Nick turned it down at that time, and then changed his mind when the food came out.
That's right. Yeah, that's why I was like, why I was like, wait, what did I? Because my notes, and I'm like trying to remember this narrative. You're right. So yeah, so Tony proposed it, Nick declined it, then Nick proposed it, and Tony accepted it. Yeah.
Right. And it was obvious in context that when Nick did it, it was more like, I want that peanut butter and cookies, but I'm having a hard time rationalizing to myself why that's okay. Well, right. Maybe if I get a fire token out of it. And Tony's like, yeah, sure, okay. You're really going to let me? Oh, all right, you did it. Okay, good, yeah. One token for an immunity necklace, that's a bargain, so he says. No kidding. And I liked that some of the other players really kind of, Nick has to answer for that a little bit. They're like, Nick, what are you doing? You knew that we had a plan to try to take out Tony. What happened? And, he has to say, regardless of how true it is, although I suspect it's largely true, he's like, well, I was about to go out anyway. But Nick, honestly, I didn't really think of him as a very Weasley player, but he keeps doing stuff like that. This is not the first episode where we have a sequence of someone calling Nick on lying to their face and him not covering very well.
It's true.
I mean, he's doing okay, but there's also a lot of conversations where people are going to say, so, Nick, Ben is telling me that Kim wanted to blindside me, and Nick's just like, what? No, like he told me you were sitting right there. Well, okay, so like I was gonna tell you and I forgot, whatever it was that he said. It's like,
yeah, Nick's. I mean, this is the advice for the future. I don't know that I think he's in an unsalvageable position. I don't
Yeah.
think that he's going to get voted out.
Yeah.
I don't think he can win though. Like I think he has a harder path to win than the people who are on extinction.
Yeah. Although, to be fair to Nick, in this particular circumstance, it was Ben's fault, right? Nick was
Mm-hmm.
trying to stick with the actual plan, and it was Ben that had been in that conversation and then told Tony about it. So,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Ben's got a tough road here too because
yeah,
Ben's been very loose-lipped with a lot of people that has caused. He's instigated a lot of the chaos, like
yeah,
almost accidentally,
mm-hmm,
because of how forthcoming he is to people that he probably shouldn't be. Particularly Tony.
yeah.
Um, he's
He feels
yeah. I
like
mean,
he's not ever in control of the situation. He's
mm,
always like at number 2 or 3 and complaining about it, and never the one actually making the decision happen.
right. And then he goes once a decision's made. If he's not happy with it, like I said, he's very loose-lipped with other people
Mm-hmm.
who, and it's almost like he wants them to change the decision. And so that's why it's almost like it's the same thing. Like it's almost like that's why he told Tony is because he
Mm-hmm.
wanted it to. But I don't know. He didn't actually. I don't want to say that because he did want Jeremy to go. His game is really weird.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yeah.
I thought even when I was going down that path, I can't defend that. Even in that.
Well, because the thing that's super weird about Ben in this episode is that Tony could not have gotten Kim out without Ben's help. But it only and he said he didn't want to do it, but it only happened because he told Tony that Kim was after him, even though Tony was immune.
Right.
So Ben kind of made this whole thing happen. With he's his own actions are undercutting what he claims to be his strategy.
Right.
Because we had that whole conversation with Nick and Kim where he's like, I don't know what to tell you. Ben told Tony everything, and they're just like, what? Why would he do that? We were working with him to do what he said he wanted to do.
Right. Which was get rid of Jeremy. Yeah.
Yes. So, I mean, we end up with Ben literally voting against the person that he most wanted to get out in order to get Kim out, which is what Tony wanted. But he complains about having to do what Tony wants when he could have just not done what Tony wanted and gotten Jeremy out.
Yeah, he had multiple chances to not do what Tony wanted. He could have not told Tony about the Kim thing until later.
Yeah. Now, I mean, maybe that's where some of the chaos from the tribal council comes in, is just that it was unclear whether he had the numbers to actually change it or not. Because, the actual vote count, it was 8, and so it was 5-3. So if just Ben had switched, it would have been a tie. But, so if he was persuaded that, like, no one else was going to switch with him, and it would have just made it be a tie, maybe that's why he felt like he was pushed into a decision he didn't want to make. But it's also just kind of like the whole situation was only like that because, anyway. So, who knows? But yeah, I think Ben has got a rough spot right now because it's going to be hard for him to sell that any of the things that are happening are his doing in like a positive way.
No, yeah. The only things that are happening that are of his doing are the chaos because of
he's swinging a sledgehammer around and occasionally connects.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah. So we'll see. So I think you kind of mentioned some room for improvement on the on Nick. Just like he's got to. He's a little bit too much playing sort of the catch up. You know, uh, I don't know, not taking control of the situation. But
Yeah. You talked about Ben and what he needs to improve on.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think the rest of them are fine. And as far as like what went wrong with Kim, like
hmm
Ben out of turn, like went to Tony when he was immune. Like he could have easily saved that until the next time when Tony wasn't
hmm
immune and said, "Hey man, when you were immune, like Kim was, I don't know where things are going now, but she was lining people up to make you next."
yeah,
Like if he wanted to, he didn't need to say anything today. So it's hard to judge Kim for having a conversation that Tony is a threat when Tony's clearly a threat.
yeah,
And trust that because he was immune, people wouldn't run to him and whip all this up. I don't feel like she did that much wrong.
yeah. No, I agree. I mean, Ben blew up her spot, and it's not obvious that he would have done that. I don't think it was a. It's only in hindsight a bad call to trust Ben on that, right? It didn't seem like it would be a bad call, but then it turned out to be because that was a surprising turn from him. But yeah. But so next time is it's a 2-hour episode this week, and then of course the 2 hours plus finale at the end, which I'm sure is going to end up being some sort of like a big Zoom call or something like that. We'll see how they handle it.
I mean, yeah, they'll probably handle it similar to how like the NFL handled the draft. I mean, it was fine. I mean, 55 million people basically just watched an elaborate Zoom call. I think they'll
They
do it
did.
here.
They did an episode of Parks and Rec, like a reunion episode, where it wasn't just like a cast reunion where they chat. It was like a new episode that they made, where the idea is that all of the characters from that show are experiencing our current timeline and are like just connecting with each other about it, and they're all getting on their own various calls and stuff like that. That was kind of funny.
I hadn't seen that. That does
Yeah.
sound funny. But,
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm sure it'll work. I mean, they're yeah. If ABC or whatever was able to put the effort into the draft for the NFL, CBS can put the effort into this to make it good.
Right.
I think it'll be fine. So
Yeah. So we are currently at 7 people, but we know that we're going to get at least one person coming back from Edge of Extinction. So if we imagine that the 2 hours this week, I would guess, are going to take us to 6 because we're going to lose one person. Then I bet we get someone back at the end of the second, at the beginning of the second hour, and then lose another person. So we're going to lose 2, gain 1. In the 2 hours is my prediction, and then we'll go into the finale with 6, which is pretty typical.
Yep, I would echo that prediction. So
Yeah, we shall see. Although, of course, what they might do is do 2 eliminations for this 2-hour episode and wait to bring someone back for the finale.
we do that at the start of like the opening of the finale.
Yeah,
I can see that too. Yeah.
I guess we'll find out. But so we'll find out when we find out, and we'll be back next week for more Survivor. So take care of each other until then.
Yeah.